My name is Kyle Norman. I'm the Additive Solutions Specialist here at MLC CAD Systems. I'm over the North Texas and Oklahoma territories. I've got Bryce here with me. He's the additive technical magician. This guy's amazing. He does the vast majority of our installs and does a lot of tech support. Fantastic guy to know. He's got the answers to all your questions. We got Joe Haynes over here. He's our additive AE. So he's out here helping us with some of the super technical questions. He's as well helping Bryce out with install, support, and all that kind of good stuff. So real quick, what we're going to cover today is we're going to talk about the Markforged software lineup. So the first thing we're going to talk about is Eiger, the Eiger, what we call Eiger Core. This is the cloud-based slicer. It comes free with every Markforged printer. We're going to talk about some benefits of that. And then we have a version of that is offline Eiger. We're as well discuss that, pros and cons to that. And then Eiger Fleet. Eiger Fleet's a pretty powerful suite of slicer software. And then Blacksmith, so automated inspection on our industrial X7 platform. And then finally, we'll wrap up with simulation. Joe recently did a webinar on simulation that goes very in depth. So reach out to us after you see what we have to say today. If you wanted to see that webinar more in depth, we're happy to point you in the right direction. So with that said, I'm gonna have Joe start out with Eiger here.
Yes. Yep. Thanks, Kyle. So so Eiger basically at its core, right? It's a slicer. Okay. So what it's doing is taking your STL file, it's slicing into layers, right? So that can be read by the printer, and really Eiger is a turnkey, seamless experience, right, to use. Okay. So like I mentioned, it's a slicer at its core. Okay, what it's doing is it's communicating between all the different printers and all the different materials that Markforged has to offer. Okay, so here you can see this robot end effector. Okay, it's a hybrid part, so we've got some metal tips there on it, and then we've got the onyx material, right, a composite material. Okay, and so like I mentioned, right, we're communicating between these different materials, between the different printers, and what it's doing is it's feeding this information then back to you. Okay, so here you can see like this metal tip. It's telling you how long it's going to take to print, how long it's going to take to wash, how much material it's going to use, and what that cost is going to look like. Okay, and the similar type pattern there with the composite material. Okay, so it's very automated, communicating all that stuff to Eiger and back to you. Okay, so I mentioned about it being turnkey, right? The ease of use. Okay, so let's look at like a comparison, right, between Eiger and say like a hobbyist slicer. Okay, so one of the great hobbyist slicers that's out there is Prusa slicer. Now, what I'd like to draw your attention to is look at the difference between like the setting, all the different settings that you have on Prusa slicer versus Eiger. Okay, and what I like to think about is think about it like a car, right? So car manufacturers, right, they give you access to the steering wheel, the throttle, right, the brake to operate the vehicle. You know, they give you all of the right things. They don't want to give you too much, okay, because then you start screwing stuff up, right? And so it's a very similar type of idea with Eiger, right? Markforged is giving you the right settings. Okay, that's all you need. All right, Eiger did the research for you. They figured out what settings are going to give you, the best print time, optimized print time, optimized for strength, okay, optimized for part quality, okay. And because of that, it's easy to use, and it doesn't take anyone with a lot of experience, right? With Prusa slicer, you've got too many settings, right? You have tons of settings, and it takes a lot of experience to know what works. Now, it is a slicer at its core, but it's also more than that, right? Eiger is a cloud-based solution. Okay, so what this looks like is all the people in your organization, right, who have access to Eiger, okay, they can load in their parts, they can organize their parts into folders, okay, and you have access to all these parts and all these folders and all your printers in your organization, right? So I'm out of Atlanta, and I can send a print job to these guys here in Dallas, or I can send it to our customers, or rather our other offices out in like Tempe, Arizona, for instance, okay. And it's automated, right? It's an automated solution. And so what this looks like is take your printer maintenance. Okay, so all the printer maintenance is tracked in Eiger. It's communicated to your printer. Okay, so you don't have to be in a situation where you have to reach out to your reseller and say, hey, I've been printing X amount of hours on my printer. I've been running X amount of material through the printer. When do I change my nozzle, right? How do I know when these various preventative maintenance items need to be tended to? Eiger is tracking all this information. Okay, so it's fed back to you directly. There's no guesswork involved. Similar with like updates, right? When Markforged releases a firmware update, releases a software update for Eiger itself, that information is readily communicated to you. The software updates happen automatically. Usually when you log in Eiger, you already see, hey, we fixed some bugs there. And then the firmware updates just show up just on that little blue bar on the bottom of your printer's user interface, and you just update accordingly. And for those who need to see how much material is being run through the printer, who's running the most print jobs, what print jobs, what parts specifically are being run the most, right? There's analytics that are available in Eiger that summarize all that information. Now we have some customers that sometimes that they hear that cloud-based and they get a little cold feet sometimes. Well, Eiger is the first cloud-based slicer to be ISO 27001 certified. Okay, so what that means is that all your part and user data, they're encrypted, both in transit and at rest. Okay, they use the Amazon Web Service Cloud, and ISO 27001. Some people may not be familiar with that, right? That is a ISMS certification, and so big like Fortune 500 companies like Microsoft and Amazon and Google, right? They have this certification, and by doing so, you know that your credit card information and your communications that run through there and all that stuff. It's all safe and encrypted, right? Eiger is the same way.
Hey, Joe, it looks like there's a couple questions. Look, the first question: is it the same slicer that we use for all of our machines?
Yeah, right. So like I had mentioned, right? So Eiger communicates with all the different printers. Okay, so if you have a Metal X printer, you're going to use Eiger. If you have an FX20 or an industrial or a desktop, right? All these different printers are going to be using Eiger, okay? And all the material profiles are already in there. So if like Markforged were to release a new material, you wouldn't have to go in and program anything or put the material in yourself. It's already going to be in there.
So you're telling me if I'm printing in composite or metal, it's the same interface that I'm in either way?
That's correct.
Oh man, that's great.
Yeah, very easy to use.
So it looks like there's another question here. So it's cloud-based. So what happens if we lose internet connection? So what if I'm printing? What if I'm trying to slice? How does all that work?
Yeah, it's a great question. We get that sometimes, customers reaching out asking about that sort of stuff. Well, I can assure you that even though Eiger is cloud-based, right, when you go to send that job to the printer, that print job downloads straight to the printer. So while it's printing, even if you lose internet, you're not going to have a print failure or anything.
Oh man, that's awesome. Well, I think that brings us to our next subject that we want to talk about. So when we're talking about offline, Bryce, tell us a little bit about offline Eiger, why don't you?
Yeah, so let's get into it with offline. Offline is great for those customers that, for military, for example, if you're going to be out in the field, you don't always have an internet connection available, and you may still need to print some parts. And so that's where offline Eiger comes in, or for specific companies that need that extra layer of security. So Eiger takes everything 100% offline. You have your printed parts, your files, and everything stored on your local computer or your local network, and it's all safe and secure there. Your parts are also, once they're sliced, they're locked to the the specific serial number of your printer. So if you put that sliced file on a USB stick, you can only print that on your specific Markforged printer. So nobody else can take your files off and run away with them and print them on your machine or anything crazy like that. The other really nice thing you get with offline is you get quarterly firmware and software updates. So your slicer, Eiger, is always running the latest and greatest, and so is the printer as well. So sometimes you'll get those updates that make it a little bit faster, improve the quality just a little bit more. So they're always keeping you up to date there. The other awesome thing you get out of offline Eiger is a LAN connector. And so you can use this LAN connector to jump into your local area network and get connected through everything, and you can still monitor your print status, you can receive that telemetry, and you can send your prints to the queue and walk over and print them. So you can either send it through this LAN connection, or you can put it on that USB stick, take it over, and print it from the machine directly.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. So, question for you, Bryce. If you know you have offline Eiger, how many users? How many users can you have? Are there any limits to that based on the printer you have?
Yeah, that's a great question. So with offline, when you get that, when you get your device, you get unlimited downloads for that specific device, and so as many people as they want can run through it. And speaking of users, there's some really cool user control with Eiger that you can use in Eiger Fleet.
Huh. Hey, that's me.
It sure is.
Hey, so the Eiger Fleet is probably one of the more advanced slicers in our fleet, right? What it does is it's scaling additive manufacturing operations in our user base. So let's talk about the features of Eiger Fleet. Probably one of the neatest, because I've got a background in data management, is the ability to manage our teams. So, and this is done through role-based access control. And what does this all mean? This means that I can create machine groups, I can create user groups, and then as I go through my processes, I can allow users to only have the ability to print on certain machine groups, on certain machines, and then users can have certain views to folders. So in other words, like say for the marketing group, we could make it where they couldn't see any of our parts that aren't released. So the idea would be that when you have parts that are kind of work in progress, you want to keep people who aren't pertinent to that project out of those parts and prevent them from being able to print those. So the next great feature of Eiger Fleet is the open API. So what the open API allows us to integrate with any of your existing systems that within your business today. So for example, we could come in and integrate to your ERP system, which would give the ability to say if a particular product was ordered, it would kick off a print job for the particular part that was involved in that assembly, right? So that machine would print the part, comes out to the printer tech, who and then drops that into the assembly line, and or packages that, and you're good to go, right? So as far as features of Eiger Fleet, understand that Eiger Fleet works in conjunction with our cloud Eiger slicer. So our core Eiger slicer, this is an addition to our core. So just like on our core, even our offline, we're still using ISO 27001 certification. So you're still encrypted at rest, encryption at transfer. Another great thing on the security side of Eiger Fleet is we have the ability to come in, and whether you're going to use single sign-on or whatever you use in your organization. So if your IT group already has a security protocols in place, we can loop that into Eiger rather, and use those same security protocols to gain access to Eiger. Again, role-based access control. So this allows, say for example, a perfect example of this is if we have younger users that come into the organization, say some people that aren't necessarily super well versed in additive, this would allow them to design a part, configure a part, and then push that through the workflow to our more experienced users in the organization, who can then analyze that and make sure that we're not printing a part that's destined to fail, or if they haven't overlooked something that's pretty important to the project. And then custom analytics. So I know Joe talked about some analytics earlier in Eiger Core, but in Eiger Fleet we have the ability to whittle this down and get a little bit further, get a little more granular, just depending upon the data you're looking to feed out, as far as groups versus groups, stuff like that. And then Well, groups versus groups brings up a fantastic point. So with the Eiger fleet, it allows us to control, say, groups. Let's say, for example, in our organization, we have groups in Dallas, we have groups in Atlanta, Phoenix, Austin. So we can create machine groups that other groups within the organization can see, but they don't necessarily have access to print. So that allows us to control that access on site, just to make sure that the throughput is optimized for our location. Final keynote, just kind of recapping the API and the business integration with Eiger Fleet. If this is something that you guys are interested in, definitely reach out to us. We want to help you through that process and start to discuss that.
Perfect. Yeah, now I know you kind of touched on some things there about that role-based access control, which I don't have as much experience with. Say, like, we've had some customers where, because they have different versions of a part in Eiger, maybe they're not available and they need someone else to go and print it. That person may end up printing the wrong version of the part, right?
Yeah.
So what does that workflow look like with the role-based access control? What kind of things would there be available maybe to prevent that from happening?
Well, that's a great question. So when we talk about the workflows, the example I used earlier was, if you bring somebody into the organization that doesn't necessarily have a lot of experience in additive, Fleet would allow them to set that project up and submit that for approval. So what we can do is we can put the more senior additive individuals of the organization in that approval process, which would allow the junior additive person to submit that basically for approval. And so while you're sitting at the desk and I don't know anything, I can submit that to you and you can review it, and then you can comment on that, and either we're going to print it or you're going to come back and go, hey, you need to turn that part, you need to reorientate that part. I would suggest a different material, something like that. So it allows us to really kind of control that instead of printing something that really isn't going to work for the organization. So with that, comes quality, right? So we start talking about quality control. I think Bryce is going to tell us a little bit about Blacksmith and our built-in quality control checks.
Yeah, so let's get into it with Blacksmith. This is probably my favorite feature of Eiger that you can get, and it's really nice for in-process quality control. And so what this does is it takes advantage of the laser micrometer that's built into the X7 print head, and you get a couple of really nice features out of this. And so the first one is this closed loop feedback, where you can actually come in and you can have your printed part, and the micrometer is going to scan the part as it prints. It's going to take into account the different bead widths and the different ways that the fiber and the plastic was laid down, and it's going to compare that to your actual STL part file, and it's going to find out where the differences are. So if there's a circle or a hole that is smaller or bigger, it's going to account for that, and the next time it prints that part, it's going to get even better. The second part of Blacksmith that's really nice is this in-process quality control. So you have a couple of traditional methods. The visual one that we all know and love. You pick something up and you try to eyeball it and make sure it's about right. This isn't always the greatest. It can differ from person to person. Kyle's getting a little bit older. His eyes aren't quite the same as they used to be.
Oh, that's for sure.
And he may let a couple of things slip down past the line, and it may not be the right quality. Joe, on the other hand, he's a little bit younger. His eyes are a little better, so he may still be able to get some stuff by, but he can't spit out a whole report for QA. He's just going to write down, circle looks good. So if you want something a little bit more technical than that, you can jump over and you can use a separate inspection process, like a laser scanner or some sort of CMM arm. And so you can use their software and hardware to measure the part really accurately. But you need somebody with a lot of expertise in that type of software and hardware, and you also need the time to be able to do that. Who has time nowadays? So Blacksmith comes in and solves kind of all those issues at the same time. So Blacksmith will scan your part as it's printing, and it's going to, like we've talked about, it's going to pick up where things are off and where it might not be quite exact, and it's going to actually spit out a whole report for quality control to look at that you can hand over as soon as the part comes off the print bed, and you'll be good to go. So let's talk a little bit about how you set Blacksmith up on the printer, because I think it's a pretty cool process to see. The first step of this is you're going to get this really nice machined print bed here. And so this has known features and known dimensions for every little bit of it, and it's actually plugged into the serial number on the print bed. And so you enter that into the printer, it pulls all the information from the cloud, and then it'll use the laser micrometer to scan this and adjust for any sort of laser or motion system misalignment issues or anything crazy, and get things as accurate as they can possibly be. So the next step is, of course, slicing your part and printing it. And here you can see the laser is actually scanning the part while it's printing. And you can actually change the fidelity of the report by increasing the laser scan frequency. It increases your print times a little bit, but you can have a much better report and a much better idea of where that part lies in terms of accuracy. So the third step is now the software is going to compare your printed file to the actual file, and then it's going to spit out a report for you. So you can even have this deviation plot report where you can see the little red dots, for instance, on the bottom part is where the part comes out of spec more than what you prefer, and so it's going to spit that out onto a piece of paper, or you can just have the visual model and know where that part lies. So that's Blacksmith. That's really my favorite feature of Eiger. I think it's really
Yeah, that's great. I mean, so Bryce, it seems to me that maybe as you scan these parts, is your machine getting smarter? What's going on? How's it getting more accurate?
Yeah, it's a great question. So it's actually using machine learning. So it's picking all the data up and it's using it, and every single time your printer's getting better and better.
Wow, that's great. So it seems to me that we're kind of we're almost eliminating kind of that quality step in the manufacturing process. So we're speeding up that process. You know, when we talk about quality, that kind of makes me think about you know, strength of our part, kind of simulation of things. So I often get asked the question, you know, how do I get this part as strong as you guys claim? Joe, can you tell us a little bit about simulation?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so with simulation, I think the easiest way to talk about this is to throw in an example, okay? So let's look at this like hook part, okay? This part has to bear 100 Newton weight, okay? So yeah, yep, so we got this part printed right here. It's at 100 Newton weight, it's about 22.5 pounds, and our deflection criteria is it cannot deflect more than 1 millimeter, right? Now, if we were to have this part like injection molded or CNC machined, right, we'd have some, you know, potentially general, you know, more general type software that could maybe handle that, okay? But when we get into talking about now simulating a 3D printed part, right, now we've got to deal with this internal lattice, very complicated, okay? We're dealing with anisotropic materials, right? We're dealing with composites, right, since we're talking about Markforged. We've got this onyx material, this nylon-based material. Now we're putting fiber groups in there. And that's where Markforged simulation is coming in, okay? And to compare these two, right, so if you look at metrics like solve time, okay, the solve time to actually go through and solve this static simulation, if you were to go through and look at, you know, the operator skill to run the software itself, you know, to look at the cost of these software, right? Now these general softwares, right, they can do different things, right? They can look at these static loads, they can do flow simulation, that sort of thing. But right, we're looking at a niche application, okay? Now with Markforged, everything because it's niche and because of how it's built into Eiger, you know, it's turnkey, it's easy to use, and as a result, right, it compares on a totally different level, right? Much easier and much lower cost. Now, when you go to load this part into simulation, right, you're charged with a variety of different things, right? You've got to select your anchor phases, okay? You've got to select your load phases. When you select the load phase, you have to actually select, you know, what the load is, right? Remember we said it was 100 newtons. And you need to talk about factor of safety as well as the deflection amount, right? So we said it was 1 millimeter, right? We don't want to exceed that. And when we selected the validate based on just the original default settings, we see a deflection of 1.69 millimeters. Okay, now one of the nice things is that simulation can then optimize, right? It can give you suggestions on how you can you know, stiffen the part and reduce that deflection. So when we go to optimize, okay, it takes a few minutes to run through, very quick. And what it's going to do is it's going to optimize off of different variables, right? It's going to optimize based on time, based on cost. Okay, that's just with the onyx material, and then it's going to look at the composite groupings, right? It's going to look at an isotropic fiber fill. It's going to look at a concentric fiber fill. And what you'll notice from this table, right, is only those two, right, the isotropic and concentric, we can see a deflection that's less than 1 millimeter. Okay, very similar deflection values, all right? But now if I draw your attention on the right side of that table, you'll notice that the print time is a little bit shorter with that concentric fiber. And you'll notice that the cost to actually manufacture that part is cheaper, okay? So what we're gonna do is we're gonna optimize based on that concentric fiber, and we're gonna click apply, right? That's that button there over on the right side. Okay, and now you can see this transition, right, from our current, right, what we originally had set. We said, okay, we think this is good enough. Well, it wasn't. Simulation said you need to add those concentric fiber groups there on the top and bottom. And you can see the result, right? So with the default settings, you can see how much it's deflecting, right? It's deflecting a lot. Now, when we optimized it with those concentric fiber fill, it's much stiffer as a result when loaded. Right, so what this is ultimately doing, right, to recap what simulation is doing is, it's cutting your print iteration time in half, okay? Because before simulation, right, if you didn't want to opt for the general simulation softwares, right, what you had to do is you just had to design and print and iterate accordingly until you were meeting your deflection requirements, right? So what it's doing is just narrowing that down and getting you to your end result faster, right? And it's still going to suggest where to put those fiber fill types. So that's a question customers sometimes give us is, where do we put fiber? How do I know, when the part is strong enough, right? And that's what simulation is helping to solve, okay? And then ultimately removing the guesswork, right? And that's kind of been the theme of this whole webinar, right? Is Eiger is just a simple and powerful tool to use.
So Joe, it looks like we got a question. Does this simulation replace my SolidWorks simulation?
Yeah, that's a good question. So with the SolidWorks simulation, right, with that general simulation type software, it can do a lot of different things, right? Whereas Markforged simulation is more geared towards your 3D printed parts, okay? And I can tell you, trying to set up a 3D printed part on a SolidWorks simulation is it's going to give you some gray hair, man.
Okay, so it's not gonna replace their standard FEA analysis, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. What we've done today is we covered the Eiger versions, and what we're doing is we're setting up the next webinar. So our next webinar is going to cover the new Markforged bundle. So Markforged is going to so we're gonna bundle all of the things that are important to a customer success. So we're gonna come out with these bundles that are gonna cover machine warranties and softwares, and it's gonna have lots of new features. So definitely come join us at the next webinar. It's gonna kind of be a continuation of what we've done today. We're super excited about that, and hope you join us for that one.